Hi, I'm Professor Hall, and this is Medical Microbiology, and today we're going to talk about aseptic methods of transfer. So if you take a look at your handout, you can follow along with me. The purpose of this lab is basically to learn and practice various techniques of moving bacteria from one piece of media to another. So there are particular techniques that help us to see bacteria a little bit better, to grow them in a particular way that works best for microbiologists. So the things you're going to need today, you're going to need 2 nutrient agar plates. So you'll get 2 agar plates. You'll need something called a nutrient agar slant, which is just media that's in a tube but slanted, so you'll see that in lab today. And then you're going to have a nutrient broth, and so like the name implies, it's a liquid form of media. You'll use a Bunsen burner like the one that we've got sitting over here, and you'll see it in a minute, as well as your loop. So those are the things that you're going to be needing for today. The particular streaking techniques that we're going to be showing you today is going to be something called streaking the slant that we'll be using for our slant media, dip and swish that we use for broth media, and then finally streaking for isolation, which we use for our plates. So the form or the direction in which you're going to be moving bacteria, you're going to go from a broth to a plate. So an inoculated broth, you'll take some of this liquid and actually streak it onto a plate using streaking for isolation. You'll be moving from a slant, an inoculated slant, to an uninoculated or sterile plate. You'll be moving from an inoculated slant to another sterile slant, and then you'll be moving from an inoculated slant to a sterile broth. And so we'll be using all of those different streaking techniques to move bacteria from one place to another. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me move this out of the way. So we're going to be using our plates and our materials that you see here. You should be using your loop, you should have that out. And then we're also going to be using the Bunsen burner. And so I wanted to show you a little bit about how to turn the Bunsen burner on and use that safely. So as you can see, we've got our Bunsen burner sitting here at our station. We've got something called a striker. And what you want to do with the striker, it has a little piece of flint. And when you push on it, the thing is, you want to grind the flint against the metal portion so you get a good spark like that. If you just keep squeezing it back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth, all you're going to do is wear out the flint and you're not going to get any sort of spark. So in class, you want to practice that a little bit. We're going to turn on the gas. Okay, so we're going to turn on our gas jet. Make sure our Bunsen burner is open. I can hear the gas actually coming out. And don't be afraid of the Bunsen burner. A lot of people are kind of afraid to turn it on. If I get a good spark, let's open that up a little bit more. There we go. So now our Bunsen burner is on. It might be a little bit difficult to see through the camera, but hold on. We always have to adjust our Bunsen burner. Open up there we go. So you can adjust your Bunsen burner to have kind of a nice blue cone within the flame. And so really what we want is kind of a short flame. We don't want it to be going up to the ceiling. And see kind of a nice blue cone that's in there so we can use it for sterilizing our loops and needles and things like that. Always be very careful when you've got the Bunsen burner turned on. We want to make sure that it's away from you. You'll have somebody sitting next to you. Make sure that it's somewhere where people can see it. The other thing is, while the flame maybe only goes up to about right here, it's hot all the way up above it. So we're not ever reaching over the Bunsen burner. You may want to get something on the other side, ask somebody to pass it to you, or go around. Make sure you're never reaching over. The other reason for not having loose clothes and things like that, we don't want to catch anything on fire. So please be very careful when you're using your Bunsen burners. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to take our loop and we're going to sterilize our loop in the flame. We're going to hold it at the top of the blue cone until it glows orange. So hopefully you can see that. So our loop is glowing orange. It's now sterile, so I don't want to touch it to anything. So now I'm going to take something out of one of my inoculated slants. So notice I've got my loop like a pencil in one hand. I pick up the inoculated tube in the other. I use these fingers, 3 and 4, to take the cap off. Don't put it down on the table. We want to keep it in our hand. And I'm going to take my sterile loop and just go into the very front of this slant and pick up a little bit of bacteria from the front. Close it up. So I put the cap back on, put that down in my rack. So now I have bacteria on my loop. I'm going to transfer that to, let's say, one of my other slants. We'll do streaking for isolation in just a minute. So I've got bacteria on my loop, again, fingers 3 and 4. I pick up the sterile slant, and I'm going to go all the way to the back of the tube, and I'm just going to zigzag up the surface of my slant. So zigzag all the way up to the front. Once I'm done, cap it, put it down, and I'm going to sterilize my loop in the flame again. So I want it to glow orange, and now it's sterile. So I also need to let it cool off a little bit. So that was streaking the slant. I took bacteria from one inoculated slant, and I put it onto a sterile slant. Next, let's do dip and swish. So I'm going to take my loop. It should have cooled off by now. I'm going to, again, take some bacteria from the inoculated slant. So using my fingers, I take the cap, never set it on the table. Pick up a little bit of bacteria from the front. I don't need to go all the way to the back. Set that down. And now pick up my sterile broth. Using my 3 and 4 fingers again, take the cap off. And I'm now going to take my loop and I'm just going to insert it into my broth. Careful not to touch the sides. And I'm just going to swish back and forth. Swish, swish, swish. That's good enough. Pull it straight back out. Put the cap on. Put it down. And now I'm going to sterilize my loop again. So we want to make sure that we always sterilize our loop in between each transfer, before and after. And then I'm going to let it cool off a little bit. Last, I'm going to do streaking for isolation. So I'm actually going to demonstrate streaking for isolation with the Sharpie marker first, and then I'll show you with the loop. You can take a look in your lab manual for kind of instructions on how to do this. But one way to do it, let me go ahead and use this kind of as a backdrop. So one way to do this, if I pretend that my Sharpie marker is the loop, I'm going to draw for you what it would look like on the plate. So I take my loop, so to speak, sterilize it in the flame, let it cool. I pick up some bacteria from my inoculated slant, put that down, and then I'm going to take my plate, and if I had my real loop, I'd open it up towards me, but I'm going to go ahead and do it just, I guess, on the cover, I suppose. So I'm going to take my loop, open up my plate towards me, and I'm going to start to do a zigzag. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Close up my plate, sterilize my loop. I'm not going to go back to get any more bacteria. I'm just going to spread the bacteria that was already there. So I sterilize my loop, let it cool, take my plate again, open it up, and I'm going to go from quadrant 1 and I'm going to pull it over into quadrant 2. Okay? Close up my plate, sterilize my loop, let it cool, open up my plate again. So here's quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. Now I'm going to streak into quadrant 3. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 into quadrant 3. Close it up, sterilize my loop, and this will be my last quadrant. Take it out, let it cool, and notice here's quadrant 1, quadrant 2, and quadrant 3. Now I'm going to take a little bit from quadrant 3. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then go into the middle. Okay? So now I should have 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I overlap from one to the other. So I'm taking a little bit of bacteria from the beginning, moving it into the second one, take a little bit from the second one, move it into the third, take a little bit from the third, and move it into the 4th quadrant. But notice I sterilized in between each transfer. And I never dipped into bacteria again except for that first time. Okay? What we're doing is we're taking bacteria and depositing it into the 1st quadrant, and then taking that bacteria and spreading it out, and then spreading it out further. So what we get hopefully at the end is isolated colonies. So we're thinning out our bacteria as we go around. So let's go ahead and do that with a loop, and hopefully it'll make a little more sense when we do that. Okay. So let's say I'm taking, I've got my loop, I'm going to sterilize it in my flame, let it glow orange for just a couple seconds, let it cool. So I have to let it cool before I go in to get bacteria because otherwise I'll fry my bacteria and then I'll have no growth. So I take my inoculated slant, notice holding it like a pencil, take off the cap, get a little bit of bacteria from the very front, close it up, and now I have my plate. So with my plate, I'm going to take the agar side, turn it towards me, notice here's the agar side, turn it towards me, and using my bacteria on my loop, very gently skate across to quadrant 1. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very gently, just a little bit. Close it up, sterilize, Okay, let it cool. Maybe say hi to your neighbor, see how they're doing. Let it cool. Then I open up my plate towards me, look to see where I put quadrant 1, and I'm just going to take a little bit from quadrant 1 and I'm going to turn it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into quadrant 2. Close it up, sterilize, let it cool off again. It takes a little while, but if you do it well, you'll get some nice results at the end. So I see where I ended quadrant 2. I'm going to go ahead and do quadrant 3. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Close it up. Sterilize my loop again. Let it cool. Remember, I didn't dip into my bacteria again except for in quadrant 1. And now I'm going to finish up quadrant 4. So I see where I ended quadrant 3, and I go 1, 2, 3, and go right into the middle. Close it up. Sterilize my loop for the last time. And then I'm done. So that's streaking for isolation. It was kind of quick, so make sure that you review it in your lab manual so you can kind of see where each quadrant is and how you're dragging from one quadrant to the next. I'm done with my flame, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the gas. And that's it for this lab, so I'll see you later.